Maniac, man. Today's guest is attorney David Green. So I know we spoke about the one of your ideas, and I've actually done it before myself, is cash for keys. And so would you want to talk about on cash?
Yeah, absolutely. Cash for keys, in my opinion, is something significantly underutilized, especially right now. If you are up against the wall thinking, hey, I could be out rent for 6, 7, or 8 months, that's a significant amount. In the interim, one of the strategies I like to recommend to my landlord and property clients is offer the tenants some money to vacate and surrender by a particular date and hand you the keys. If they're, if they're the type of tenant that's looking to use these protections as an excuse not to pay the rent, they're probably also going to be motivated by money.
Yes.
It's just a perception on my part. There's, no guarantee it's going to work, but if you can calculate what your cost would be to do an eviction, and let's just pick a number out of that. Let's say it's $750 to do an eviction. It's a phantom number. It doesn't represent anything necessarily, but if it's $750 to do an eviction,
Yeah.
and you're willing to offer the same amount to the tenant to vacate by a particular date and avoid the delay and loss of future rents, you come out well ahead. I've even had landlords offer to get U-Hauls.
Yeah, I've done it.
Which are available right now. And many people I've been in communication with are moving through my real estate practice, and they can get U-Hauls. So you can rent a U-Haul for them. You can even give them partial security to somewhere else where they're going. There's a lot of different forms in which cash for keys can arise, because the last thing you want to do is give up the money and have them sign a paper saying, yeah, I surrendered, but then yet they don't leave. And that's dangerous, because if they're still there and you say, well, wait a second, I paid them $750 and they surrendered possession, and you call the cops are going to show up and they're going to say, well, sorry, Mr. Jones, this is their apartment until you get a formal eviction and executed through the sheriff's office. They have the right to stay here. So it's tricky, but you start off by getting a 1 or 2 line, agreement saying, I, Mr. Tenant, the undersigned hereby agrees to surrender possession back to the landlord as of May 15th, 2020, and hereby terminate my lease. And upon tenant handing the keys to the landlord, that act alone will be the act of surrendering the premises, and then the landlord has the right to go change the locks, take back possession, and wish the tenant best of luck in your next
Best of luck.
premises. But you got to really be mindful and not be too trusting, because tenants are tricky. And if you give up that money too soon, then you have the potential to lose it entirely. And if they say, well, give me part up front, the answer is no. If the question is, well, can you write it out to my new landlord or as a security? The answer, again, is probably no, because you can't certify who that person is. It's probably an ex-girlfriend or a mother-in-law or who God knows, and we're going to see the money again. So just
I would just get them the only thing I would risk maybe is a $100 U-Haul. Because if I give them the money for the U-Haul, then they load the truck up. When the truck's all loaded, they've signed all the papers, we've changed the locks, then hand them the money. I wouldn't hand them the money until the last moment, and I see the U-Hauls full and they're out. Don't let them give them any money if they have anything in your house, because they're never coming back either. So
I agree. That's the best approach, and it can be useful, and maybe more so now than ever, because if you're looking at another 3 or 4 months before you can get somebody out, I mean, an average rent, let's say $750 a month, looking at $3,000 more. So it's difficult.
It's definitely, and they'll leave it in better shape too. And you may even get them to do a little work before they leave if they want that money. It depends on where they're going to go. But if they want to go and they have somewhere to go, it may work out for everybody, and they'll be a lot better off.
Yeah, and adding to that equation, if you can get a tenant remove their belongings, that alleviates the landlord's responsibility to have to store it for a minimum of 30 days.
Yes.
You can go in, clean, paint, and re-rent sooner rather than later. So give it some thought for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a good idea. I was talking to one of our clients today about it, and he said, "Yeah, go ahead. If you can get them to do it, do it." So it may be a little tricky right now because they don't have anywhere to go, but it's still worth a conversation. So that's good advice. So let's jump into the laws that came into effect last year. I think we're the toughest in the country besides California, right, for landlord tenant laws?
Yeah, landlord tenant law effective June 14th. It was passed, so that was a Friday. It happened late in the day. So for all intent and purposes, effective June 17th, 2019, we are faced with a new set of landlord tenant laws, which on their face, I would say would have to be as strict, if not more strict, than many of the states across the nation. Um, the law came into effect, but there was a number of different implementation periods. We're now past all of those implementation periods, so it's not relevant to talk about it.
Yeah.
Now here in May 1st, 2020, so all the new laws have been phased in, and all new landlord tenant leases have to adhere by these laws. And the most prominent change was the time periods. Traditionally, a summary proceeding, which is a fancy name for an eviction, was supposed to happen quickly, quick, swift recovery of somebody's property. That's no longer the case. Under the new laws, I average about 65 days to get back possession of your property. And here's why. We're going to talk about the non-payment portion of it first.
Okay.
Tenant is not paying rent. In order to commence a non-payment proceeding, you have to first serve two predicate documents. The first is a 5-day breach letter that's served by certified mail, indicating that the tenant is more than 5 days late on paying rent. That's all it is it's a reminder. Hey, more than 5 days has passed since your rent obligations has accrued. Please pay up or you could face eviction. It's not a demand. It just says, hey, you're late. It's kind of a stupid requirement, in my opinion, because every certified mail that comes out of my office comes back. Nobody signs for it. No one takes it. And I don't know if the legislator just wanted to give the post office a bump or what, but I haven't served a 14 or 5-day notice here now in probably 8 weeks, and I'm still getting them back. They still, every day the post office, there's 2 or 3 more. So in order to commence a non-payment proceeding, you have to do this 5-day certified mailing. I call it 5-day because you can't do it until after 5 days has elapsed from when rent was due. So if it's due on the 1st of the month, you can do this letter on the 6th, okay?
Yeah.
So that's just my terminology that I use. I call it the 5-day letter.
Yeah.
So on the 6th of the month, typically, or the 6th day after rent is due, you send this letter out certified mail. Then you also have to do a 14-day rent demand. The 14-day rent demand takes the place of the previous 3-day notice that we all talked about and we all utilized. This is a document that demands rent only. Nothing else can be put in there. Rent only. So if the rent's $750 a month and they owe for 2 months, let's call it January and February, the 14-day demand notice will reflect, hey, you got to pay me $1,500. That's $750 for January, $750 for February, and it has to be paid within 14 days from the date that the tenant is served it. Otherwise, you can proceed to the next step, which is going to court. Typically, you should have a professional serve these documents because an affidavit of service will be required to accompany the 14-day demand notice with the filings with the court. They have to have that. If they don't, they won't accept it. And if you can't produce it, if you provide a copy and you can't produce the original, it's going to get dismissed. So this is a very, very significant change from the old law where we could just do a verbal. We could say, hey, I gave my tenant a 3-day notice verbally because it said written or otherwise. Now it has to be a written demand, and it has to be professionally served either by a process server, your property manager, somebody that has familiarity with it. If you screw around, and I don't mean to be sarcastic, but if you screw around and you just have like a husband, a wife, a child, somebody's servant, it's going to get screwed up because there's certain steps that you have to take to serve documents in the state of New York. And specifically, you have to make 3 attempts at personal service. So if I want to evict, tenant A and B from a premises, I prepare my 14-day notice. My process server then takes it from me. He goes out and he makes 3 attempts at personally serving the individual. If they get personal service, right, they take a description down, they do an affidavit of service to say, I serve this individual at this date and time. This is the physical description of them. And then they hand back the affidavit of service to the court. If they don't get personal service after 3 attempts, then they leave a physical copy at the premises. We call this nail and mail. And then they have to follow up the nail and mail, or the leaving a copy there. They follow up with a certified mail and a regular mail, not just certified, but certified and regular. So that tenant has 3 possibilities of getting that notice: the one left at the property, the one certified mail, or the one that's mailed regularly. So then we fast forward. Let's say we do the 5 and the 14. And keep in mind, those can be done, they don't have to be done simultaneously. They can be done at separate points in time. If you're trying to save money as a big property management group, such as yourself, Brock, you may want to do all your 14-day notices. And then when it comes time to determine which ones might go to court, maybe you do the 5-day letter then, because a 5-day letter, takes 5 minutes to produce, costs, I think it's around $5.39 to do certified mailing, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
And why waste doing it if you serve the 14 first and they pay?
Yeah.
So they don't have to be done simultaneously. They just both have to be done prior to, filing. So you can manage your practice however you see fit. I tend to do them at the same time just because it's easier. Because I have the file, just you bang it out, you do it. So now we fast forward. You do the predicate notices. You have your affidavit of service. You have your proof of mailing of the 5-day with the certified green card. You now want to say, hey, I need to get this to court. So typically, in your case, you forward it to me, or if anyone else is doing it themselves or using an attorney, they get it to the responsible party for preparing it. That person is going to prepare a notice of petition and petition for non-payment of rent. You're going to spell out in your petition all the rent that was due and any future rent that has since come due. So if we're in a later month, include the later month's rent. And we're going to get a court date. Now, the new laws indicate that once you file an action, you have to serve them anywhere between 10 and 17 days before the action. So there's very specific guidelines. It used to be 5 and 12, but they've bumped it up an extra 5 days. Now it's 10 and 17. So if you're doing the math in your head, you do your 14-day notice typically around the middle of the month, because you don't want to get crazy doing too many of them too early, because a lot of people will pay. So if you do your 14-day in the middle of the month, then by the first of the following month, you're getting a court date, which isn't until about the 20th of the month. And then the day comes and we finally get to go to court. Yeah. Now this new law, I don't want to sound too pro landlord, but it's gotten a little ridiculous because it's completely one-sided, in my opinion. The landlords don't have a lot of leverage any longer. And that's a key point, because when you don't have a lot of leverage, you got to minimize the emotion. And you got to make sure you act quickly and that you have proper management and proper counsel so that you don't waste time.
Yep.
Once we're in court, the law has carved out an automatic 2-week adjournment for no reason whatsoever. The tenant can just say, I want to get an attorney, or I want some time to think about it, or I just don't want to be here today. The court, by law, has to allow a 2-week adjournment of the matter. I don't really understand this, but it is what it is. We'll have to play with it.
Let me ask you one question about that. What is the percentage of tenants that are asking for that? Because I would assume as we go on, that percentage is going to get higher because more people are going to get smarter. But what are you seeing? What's the percentage you've been seeing?
So when I go to court, I have a pretty good feel for people now. I've years of doing, where it's going typically.
Yeah, for sure.
And what I do is I know that the sheriff's office is typically backed up a certain amount of days. So in Albany, where I do the most of my evictions, the Albany County Sheriff's Office, if I file a warrant, it's going to take them 3 weeks to execute anyway. So I know that I'm working with 3 weeks there. So if I'm going to court and somebody wants an adjournment, I say to them, no, I understand you're entitled to it by all means. I mean, we can come back here in 2 weeks. And but it's just because you need time to get out, because if you want the time, why don't we just stipulate to a particular date by which you'll be out? How's 30 days sound? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just throw it out there. And they look at me and they're like, oh, wow, that's pretty awesome. And I say, look, 30 days, you don't have to pay any rent. Maybe we'll waive part of the judgment. Maybe we'll keep part of the judgment. It depends on the case. And they usually you can find some sort of middle ground, because that way I know if I have to wait 2 weeks to go back and then I don't get the warrant, and then the warrant's going to be another 3 weeks to execute, I know I'm 5 weeks out in Albany.
Yeah.
So if I can get somebody to agree to a date around 30 days without having to go back to court, my client's happy. No additional attorney's fees, no additional communication. They can file the warrant immediately. They can get put on the calendar for that exact date, and they can plan properly.
Yeah.
So most of the time, I approach people before they can even talk. I always ask them one question: are you looking to stay? Or you're looking to go? Okay, you're looking to go. When can you be gone by? And then we pick a date, and then we go in, and I maybe, I do over 1,000 cases a year. I probably only have about 5 to 6, 7 trials a year tops, because
Good. That's good.
You stipulate. It's never in the landlord's favor to go and have a trial, because you're talking fees to have that trial. You're talking further delay, and oh my gosh, what about the risk if the judge doesn't see it our way? You gotta.
Yeah, it's possible. Very, very possible.
Tenants are pretty savvy, but I would have to tell you that they're more savvy if you have a confrontational approach and you engage with them. If you just treat them like a human being, you say, hey, look, what's this? What's the deal here? What are you looking to accomplish? Let me see if I can help you. They're pretty cool with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. So that's good to know. I didn't know it was only 6 or 7 a year. So that's definitely.
Yeah, I do very few, because I'd rather give away the farm than charge a landlord more money, because money out of your pocket in attorney's fees is you're never going to get back. Whereas if you can get them to consent to a date, it makes it easier to plan, clean out, and have your crew ready to go.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
yeah, I would say definitely. The number one thing is screen your tenants so you don't end up in court. I think screen the tenants well enough, you're gonna end up in court about 1% of the time. If you just learn how to screen tenants, because you probably see some of the same people coming back and back and back, and it's because they haven't learned how to screen the tenants. If the same landlord doesn't get any more units and has the same amount of units, but he continues to hire you all the time, unless he's got 500 units. There's probably a screening problem.
I think the evictions that I do the most repetitively are single individual landlords that don't have property managers.
Yeah.
Because let's say, for example, you manage 1,000 properties and you do 3 to 4 evictions a month.
Yeah.
Okay? Versus a lot of these single landlords, they own 4 to 6 units, and they're still having 5 or 6 evictions a year.
Yeah, exactly.
They get emotional. They get engaged with their tenants. They take things personally, and relationship breaks down, and then people don't pay. So to avoid this, if you can, get competent property manager, get good counsel, and act swiftly, act in a timely manner, and you'll spend money but make more money because you're saving. And I always say there's 2 ways to make more money: you earn more or you save.
Yep.
With having competent property manager and a competent attorney on staff to act quickly, you're saving lost rents, and therefore you have a bump up at the end of the year, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I think number one thing is to do that. Also, learn how to screen tenants. It's not complicated. My thing is this, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but I think the common denominator, if you go to any court, Schenectady, Troy, Albany, on any given day, and you look at why people are there, the number one reason is lack of employment. It's gaps. If gaps kill people, because they're the ones that work for 3 months and lose their job. They don't get out of bed. It's not that they don't want to pay rent. They'd love to pay if they had the money. It was that they didn't go to work. They lost their job. Now there's a gap, and that's what we see. So when we're screening tenants, that's what we look for. We look for those gaps. We want people that they've been employed for 2 years. If they have gaps, it makes sense. That's the number one thing we look at. And then that changed our business a lot, I don't know, 15 years ago when we started looking at it that way. So I think that's a big problem. If you look at people and you see that they have 6 months here, they keep switching jobs, that's an indicator you're going to end up running into a problem in the future.
Yeah, and you can speak to that better because that's your job specifically to
Yeah.
rent. I will tell you that the top three reasons why someone is in court is a medical reason,
Yep.
B, they had a child, which is kind of a medical reason, I would just have to say,
Yeah. Yep.
uh, and thirdly, the lost employment, like you said. So if you can monitor those things closely, that's great. Under the new law, you are prohibited from discriminating or even looking into someone's eviction history or past. So
Yeah.
the screening has become even more important.
Yeah, it's 100% more important.
It's all about
100%
screening.
more important. I mean, we get all that data, but yeah, we don't. There's always a way. You don't have to use that one metric. You can look at all the other ones. You know what I mean? So like, you don't have to say, oh, they don't qualify because they've been evicted before. Because if they've been evicted before, there's other reasons why they're not going to qualify anyway. So we just look at the whole picture, and it's case by case. We don't. That's how we work it. What do you find as far as it used to be Troy was the best, fastest to get people out of, from my experience. Does it not matter anymore, or is there still a court that is faster than the other ones?
Well, yeah, Troy used to be the best. A little shout out to Judge Turner. Judge Turner and I have a good rapport with one another, and he knows how to run his courtroom very nicely. It used to be where you walked into there and you sit down, and Judge Turner would say, "This is a notice of petition for the non-payment of rent in the amount of X amount of dollars. Is that correct, Mr. Green?" And I'd say, "Yes, that's correct, Your Honor." He'd turn to the tenant and say, "Hey, do you admit or deny owing rent to your landlord in the amount of X dollars?" If they said yes, he'd move right on to, "Okay, there being no triable issue of fact, warrant and judgment are issued. You want that to go, Mr. Green?" "Yes." Boom. 3 days later, the following Wednesday, they're evicted because court's always on a Thursday in Troy. So that was a dream come true if we were in Troy. Now we don't have those privileges because you walk in and anybody that even muffles, "I want an adjournment," or there's an abatement issue, or any sort of confusion, and also mental illness. Mental illness is unfortunately a lot more prevalent than you'd like to think. It's out there. So if Judge Turner picks up on any of these things, he's got to be protective of the law and
For sure.
the law says. So then he puts it down for hearing 2 weeks out, and then when you come back in 2 weeks, then if you get the relief you're looking for, it's another 2 weeks after that before the marshals in Troy can execute on it. But it's still slightly faster in Troy for two reasons. Judge Turner recognizes what is and isn't a triable issue of fact. So he can sometimes cut to the chase and avoid unnecessary trials, which other courts cannot. And secondly, we have marshals. We have appointed marshals by the city council who can execute on the warrant. And they will do it exactly 14 days after service. Whereas if you have to use the sheriff's office in Albany County or in Saratoga County or Schenectady County, you're at their liberty to when they can schedule. And if they're back, they got a lot of vacations, they're not that hungry. Okay. The marshal hungry to get that money.
Yeah, they give me. Yeah.
So there's still a slight advantage in Troy and Cohoes because in Cohoes we have Gary Oliver and his son Jerry does the lockouts on warrants. It will be 14 days to the second from when that warrant is served. So, but the playing field is largely even or leveled, I should say, sorry, under the new law.
Now, as far as having to store stuff, Amsterdam has a crazy practice in Amsterdam. You have to move the stuff for them. Is that still the same way in Amsterdam? Because in Amsterdam, it used to be that the last time we did an eviction in Amsterdam, I don't think it wasn't with you. I don't think this could have been you, but it was a while ago. And we had to actually move the stuff for the guy, and we had to put it in his U-Haul. That was what we were told by the marshal or the sheriff.
Right. I don't go out to Amsterdam, so you're right. You would have employed somebody else. Amsterdam has their own, set of rules out there, and it is very similar to how the Rensselaer County Sheriff's Office does it as well. which fortunately we don't have to use too much because we can use the Marshall and Troy. And that is they do a full removal, not just a lockout. We're used to just going, changing the locks,
Yeah.
wishing the tenant well, if they're even there, maybe calling animal control, taking whatever animals and calling it a day. At some later point in time, we would go back and we would, collect this stuff up and move it or keep it there for 30 days and throw it out.
Yep.
Amsterdam, it sounds as if they're very similar to how the Rensselaer County Sheriff's Office is. You have to do a complete removal. So when they show up, they want everything out. Everything's going to be, and it's your responsibility to store it. It's very inconvenient, and I've been lobbying the Rensselaer County attorney, CJ Kemp, his name's Carl, to reverse that. And I think we're starting to get some traction, and we're going to probably see the Rensselaer County Sheriff's Office just allow lockouts going forward. It's a little bit more practical because you can't tie up resources for 6, 7, 8 hours while the sheriff stands there and you empty a house. It's
such a waste. Such a waste.
Complete waste. And it doesn't help the tenant any because now the tenant's belongings are thrown across the lawn or they're in the back of a U-Haul. They're unsettled, they're anxious. It creates a lot of emotional reactions, and you don't need that. If you just go change the locks and call it a day, then it's over, and the tenant can come back with a U-Haul at their time. You let them in, you take it, or if they abandon it, 3 days goes by, you junk it.
Is it 30 days Albany's got Detroit? They're all 30 days?
Yeah, everything's still in line with that 30 days. Nothing's changed under the new law as far as post-lockout. Although post-lockout, nothing has changed. However, when we were talking about bringing a non-payment proceeding, there is a very, very, very important distinction under the new law. Once the warrant has been issued, once we go to court, any adjournments have passed and we go to court, we finally get the relief we're looking or seeking, and that is the almighty warrant. If it's a non-payment proceeding, the warrant is tied to a dollar amount that is owed. So let's go back to the 2 months of rent at $750. The judge issues the warrant for $1,500. There can be no costs, no attorney's fees, nothing else can be added to that judgment amount in Albany. Other courts have deferred from that a little bit, but in Albany specifically, you can only get the rent amount. Now we take it to the sheriff's office, and the sheriff's office serves it, schedules a date to do the lockout, probably 3 weeks out. If the tenant pays $1,500 anytime prior to the lockout, that renders the lockout moot. It gets vacated, and you can no longer lock him out. You have to accept the money, and you have to cancel the lockout.
Yeah, big change.
Most frustrating thing ever, because earlier on in this podcast you said, well, what if we just go on the 2 months rent and really want somebody out? Well, they have the ability to rescue themselves if they pay the judgment amount at any time prior to the lockout. Landlords don't get that, and they're getting support.
That's a good point. Such a risk.
And you don't get the right to recover attorney's fees other than in a separate action. Even though your lease says you can recover these things, they're not going to be awarded to the landlord in the summary proceeding, the eviction. You would have to bring a small claims action, a completely different proceeding to recover them. And it's not practical.
It's not worth it. You're burning money.
Yeah.
Burning
That's
money.
why the most important thing any landlord can do is start quickly. Don't wait until you're 3 months behind. That is foolish. No one's going to rescue someone that's 3 months behind. When they're 15 days late, start the proceeding immediately. Just do it.
Yep. I get these calls. I got a call the other day. A guy was hasn't paid since October. So, and the guy hired us, just a few days ago. So the guy hadn't paid since October, and we may be able to start getting him to start paying, but he still hasn't paid since October. So, and who knows if we'll be able to pay or not. He's obviously not a good tenant. But that's what's crazy about it. I mean, it's just crazy. That's a great point, because I didn't know that. I mean, I hadn't put that together. That's because I do know that, but when I was asking that question, I didn't think about that. When they go to court, they could just, they can wait till the day of the sheriff, call and say, I got the money, you got to take it.
That's right.
That's a big change from the 19 years of me doing this. That's a big change. Because I used to be able to say no, and I would say no in the past. If I got you all the way to that point, I was not taking the money because that would be a really bad business decision on my part. And now you don't have a choice.
Yeah. And keep in mind, it's only the amount of the judgment. So if somebody goes to court now on a 14-day notice that was served back in February, and it's only for January and February's rent, and now we don't get to court till July, and they default and they don't show up, then they get the 14-day notice from the sheriff's office posted. They can come at any point in time without having gone to court and pay the $1,500 and save themselves. And that landlord would have to start over with March, April, May, June, July's rent all over again.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good piece to really think about. It may not make sense. So, all right, well, David, I appreciate you coming on. I know you helped a lot of people today. Definitely cleared up some stuff for me, for sure. So I got one question. I got a last. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you had two other things that we had to hit on real quickly that we need to make a distinction for under the new law.
Okay, go ahead.
Two really quick points. Actually, three. I'm an attorney. I lied. The first of which is when you enter into a new lease agreement anytime after June of 2019, which we're now past, you can only collect upfront 1 month's security. Yep. Okay, you can't have anything other than 1 month of what the rent is. So if your rent's $1,000 a month, and you typically would get a pet fee or redecoration fee, whatever you want to call it, anything cannot add up to more than what 1 month's rent is. Okay, if you do, it's illegal, and you're going to get slapped in the hand heavily at a later point in time. So only 1 month advancements. Number two, if you want to terminate a lease other than for non-payment, for example, they're a holdover, you don't want to keep them. Typically, it was always 30-day notice once the lease had expired. Well, now the new law requires that you give a 30-day notice if the tenancy is, if they've been there less than a year. Okay, so if you do a lease that's 364 days, or in this particular year, 365,
yeah,
you can get away with giving a 30-day notice prior to the lease ending. If once they've been there more than a year and less than 2 years, it's a 60-day notice. And once they're there greater than 2 years, it's a 90-day notice. So you need to be very careful when you're terminating leases as holdover, how long they have been there and what the lease says. Very, very important that that be followed, because if you get to court and you're wrong, you're starting over, and it could be drastic. And even if you inherit a tenant, Brock, let's say, for example, you start taking over a management of a building in May of 2020, and then in October you want to get rid of them, and you're like, oh, well, they've only been there 6 months. No, what if they were with the prior?
Yeah, you always got to look back. Yep.
You have to tack on how long they've been there. And finally, retaliation is given new legs under the new law. You have to be very careful. If a tenant complains of basically anything that has to do with a government agency, like they call code, or they just complain to you about a matter that would be code related, and then you try to give them a holdover because they're just really a nuisance, they can claim retaliation. It's been given a lot of ground by the courts. And then the last thing that I will tell you on the new law changes, I think is very important to highlight, is the fact that when a tenant is vacating and you have their security, there's very specific rules you have to follow. You have to give a tenant the opportunity 14 days prior to them vacating a walkthrough. You have to do that walkthrough with them and highlight anything that would otherwise reduce the security deposit, so they have an opportunity to fix it and not lose the security. So you have to do that walkthrough with them within 14 days prior. And that's, of course, if you know they're moving. If they don't give you any indication that they're moving, then obviously you can't do that. But if you know they're leaving, you have to do that. Once they've left, within 14 days, you have to account to them if you're going to keep any of the money. If you don't account for it, or if you don't give them that walkthrough, an affirmative defense in a small claims action when they sue you, then you're going to lose as a landlord, and you're going to be giving it back to them.
Yep.
And the last thing that the new law changed was there's a hardship provision. Well, there's a lot of changes, but the highlights are there's a hardship provision, and that is if you terminate somebody's lease, regardless of, or if you bring them to court, regardless if it's non-payment or a holdover, and you get a warrant, the tenant can claim hardship saying, I can't find another place to go. It would be a big hardship for me to move. And the judge can actually extend the time period for which the warrant can be executed. However, the tenant has to pay for that extension. So if you're looking to get rid of somebody because you want to sell a house and the person's on oxygen and they need a first floor apartment, or they got some sort of therapy pet and they got to find a place to go that has, you know, a certain number of blades of grass outside. I'm being sarcastic because everybody has a therapy pet nowadays.
Yes.
Then you could possibly be at risk at not getting that apartment vacant in time for a sales contract. It's very, very important that builders know that just because you sign a contract that says a place is going to be vacant, we can't guarantee it. You can never.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
So going forward, any advice for new landlords is very simple. I prefer, and I don't know what your thoughts on this are, Brock, but I prefer initially when an individual landlord's doing it, they should start them off on like a month-to-month lease, like as a probationary period, to see if they're good tenants first. Because if you lock into a lease and you don't like somebody, it can be quite the experience trying to get rid of them. But you screen so well, it's, you know, maybe that's not as in your practice. Secondly, as we've stressed a number of times for this podcast, act quickly. You know, don't wait, because the court's your friend. The sooner we can get into court, the more options we have if we legitimately want to save them. And finally, you know, keep the emotions on the sideline and treat it as a business transaction. Get competent counsel, competent property managers, and you know, ask sooner rather than later. Those are just quick things.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense for sure. So I appreciate all your time. Appreciate answering all the questions. And like I said, this will help some people. It definitely helped me straighten out some of the stuff. With all these new laws, when you're used to doing something for, at that point, it was 19 years of doing it. It's so hard to, you know, it flips within a month. It's kind of like COVID. I mean, everything changed in a 30-day period, and there was dates for it, but it took a little while because you got to change your whole business. Like, our application process changed, the different fees changed. It cost us a lot of money. It takes time. It takes time to make those changes when you're running a business, you know. So at this point, we got it covered, but it's good to have it straightened out. So I appreciate that.
And as always, if you or anyone else, any of your clients have questions or concerns, they can certainly ask you, and you can forward it on to me or.
Yeah, we'll throw your number in this video as well, so people will have it, or we'll throw your email on here so people.
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with. You know, you're producing this, and I don't want to rain on anyone's parade, but I am here to assist people. My strengths are definitely with getting people to court and handling it once we're in court. The laws I have no control over, and I think that we're going to continue to see some turbulence over the next 30 days before we have a real clear picture of what's going to happen. So stay tuned. Watch the news and maybe any follow-ups you might have.
Okay, appreciate it.